Well, Robert F. Kennedy might not exactly be mainstream, but at least according to political_polls on X, when you pit Robert F. Kennedy versus Biden, Kennedy beats him, and when you pit Kennedy against Trump, they tie. Now, obviously, in the general election, we expected this to be a rematch of Trump v. Biden, but the point is, clearly, at least some of RFK's policies are making waves. One of those includes a topic I happen to be, have basically dedicated my career to, and that is real estate. Bringing back the 3% mortgage, RFK's plan to level the economic playing field. Let's take a look at this as posted on The Hill. Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy has shown an impressive gift of policy innovation. Recently, he began to roll out his economic plan, which would, among other things, level the playing field for working-class Americans seeking to buy a home. Kennedy points out there has been a shift of $4 trillion of wealth since 2020 from the working class to the super wealthy. Let's just quickly make the point here that that's probably going to keep happening. I hate to say it, but I just made a video about basically the death of the middle class, how the middle class is getting crushed. And unfortunately, I think there's a chance that crushing of the middle class will continue as housing continues to get more and more affordable. And even if we end up having goods deflation, the only thing that could come from goods deflation is a likely layoff cycle, which would once again crush the middle class. As middle class wages go down, lower class individuals are able to bump up into the middle class, hopefully, and upper class individuals take more of a share of the stock market and real estate wealth. I hate to say that. That is what I think our future is heading towards, which made me really interested in RFK's point. He says, this in part is because of inflation. This is where we differ a little bit, right? I think inflation, I personally am not convinced we're going to have a second wave of inflation, but it could happen, and that's just going to make it even harder. But I think, let's say you have inflation, guess what? It's bad for the lower and middle class. Let's say you have deflation, like negative inflation, ironically also bad for the lower and middle class because yes, things might get less expensive, but it'll come at the cost of a recession, which means you might lose your job. So the goal being hold on to your job, right? But what is RFK's goal here? And this is the interesting part, not so much the chat about this, but it has to do with a mortgage. Kennedy's proposal would change the tax code to disincentivize the corporate takeover of residential real estate, while guaranteeing government-backed mortgage interest rates of 3% for millions of buyers. Now, it's very politically popular to sort of fight the corporate takeover of single families. Do keep in mind that over 80 to 90% of properties are purchased by home buyers. That depends on what market you're in. And when you actually look at the sliver of institutional ownership of single families, it's in the less than 3% range. However, and this is different than corporate takeover, the biggest competition that home buyers do have are local investors. It's usually mom and pop investors. They're the ones that do end up competing with home buyers. But either way, Kennedy makes this proposal for a 3% mortgage. Now, this program would basically sell bonds to individuals who want to invest in probably higher yield bonds, because otherwise you would just buy treasury securities. So you'll have to pay a higher yield on these bonds, the government would. But in other words, they're going to try to come up with a way to reduce first-time home buyer payments by giving them the chance at a 3% mortgage, which could save about $1,000 a month. We could fact check this pretty easily. If you take a 20% down deal on, let's say, a $400,000 home, so we end up going with, let's say, a $320,000 loan amount, and the current interest rate is, say, 7.25 on a 30-year fixed, and we drop this all the way down to 3%, our monthly payment's going to go from about $2,200 to $1,349. Almost $1,000. That was about $850 there on a $320,000 loan. So this is not incorrect. However, as exciting as that is, not all the things RFK is saying are factual. For example, this line: if you have a rich uncle who will co-sign a mortgage for you, you can get a much lower rate because the bank will base it on his credit rating rather than yours. This is incorrect. When you get a loan, all of your co-borrowers' credit scores are lined up, and they're going to go by the middle score of the person with the lowest credit score, unfortunately. They don't take the best credit score because they underwrite to the highest level of risk, which is the person with the lowest credit score. So that's not exactly accurate, but hey, politicians make little oopsie doopsies. I think the idea here is, can we have a 3% program that then lets home buyers basically buy houses for cheaper than what even mom and pop investors could? And so in that case, I would say the answer to that is yes. Now, if we do end up having deflation, rates are going to go right back down to 3% anyway. The Fed cuts rates to 0%. We have a recession. Interest rates are going to go down to 3% for everybody anyway. But yes, let's be real for a moment. If mom and pop investors in a neighborhood and corporate landlords, if they're even borrowing, they could be borrowing through other means. But let's just say investors who are borrowing on a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, if they're paying 7.5% and a first-time homebuyer is paying 3%, they will absolutely be able to be much more competitive than the investors. And yes, you would be handing a big win to first-time homebuyers. Not a terrible idea. I personally think the best case scenario is we figure out how to build more housing. Of course, as you've seen in states like California, that seems to be politically too complicated to understand. Oh well, you'd think the uni party of California would figure that out. I could say that because I ran for governor in California and tried to change it. But anyway, back in the 1930s and 40s, let's keep going here. Back in the 1930s and 40s, innovations in housing policy perfected the 30-year mortgage. Yes, 30-year amortized mortgage. Nobody really calls it that anymore, but yeah. Introduced the government-backed insurance. These are your Fannie Mae's, your Freddie Mac's. They basically say, hey, you can get a government-backed 30-year mortgage, which without the government, frankly, you wouldn't have a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. You'd be in a system like what you have in Europe or in Canada, where you might get a 10-year fixed-rate term, more likely a 5-year fixed-rate term, and then you either have to refinance, sell, or pay the higher payment. So as far as RFK's plan, it's not a horrible idea for first-time homebuyers. I don't think it's the best solution, but it's definitely something that would help first-time homebuyers get in competition with your largest competing type of homebuyer, which is the local mom and pop real estate investor. It's the person who's buying their second, third, or fourth rental property. That's your biggest competition outside of other homebuyers, not the corporation. And that we can statistically prove. Here, for example, is a Housing Wire post which breaks exactly this down. It shows you that iBuyers, like a Redfin when they were buying, or an Open Door, they buy just 0.5% of properties. Companies that own 1,000+ properties own just 0.3% of properties, or purchase just 3.3% of properties in the second quarter of 2023. Those who own 100 to 999 properties were just 0.7% of buyers, and those buying 10 to 99 properties or holding 10 to 99 properties were 2.7% of sales. It was actually those smaller mom and pop buyers that owned between 1 to 9 properties that were the biggest competing force, again about 20%, versus that 25 to 20%, versus that 75 to 90% homebuyer competition, again, depending on what type of market you're in. So there's the data to fact that up and back that up. But what I want to ask is, what do you think about an RFK presidency, and do we need an independent that could finally have a real chance against a Democrat or a Republican? Or are we just going to adopt their ideas?
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.
Even though I'm a licensed financial advisor, licensed real estate broker, and becoming a stockbroker, this video is not personalized advice for you. It is not tax, legal, or otherwise personalized advice tailored to you. This video provides generalized perspective, information, and commentary. Any third-party content I show shall not be deemed endorsed by me. This video is not and shall never be deemed reasonably sufficient information for the purposes of evaluating a security or investment decision. Any links or promoted products are either paid affiliations or products or services we may benefit from. I also personally operate an actively managed ETF. I may personally hold or otherwise hold long or short positions in various securities, potentially including those mentioned in this video. However, I have no relationship to any issuer other than HouseHack, nor am I presently acting as a market maker. Make sure if you're considering investing in HouseHack to always read the PPM at househack.com.